Florence, a city pulsating with ambition and genius, held a dark secret. Beneath its gilded facades and vibrant street life, a powerful family pulled the strings, shaping not just politics, but the very minds that dared to think differently. The Medici, masters of wealth and influence, turned Florence into a beacon of intellectual fire, yet their patronage often came with a heavy price. Brilliance flourished, but shadows of intrigue and power games lurked behind every learned debate, every groundbreaking discovery. Get ready to dive into the lives of 10 incredible scholars who walked these very streets, challenging the known world, clashing with authority, and leaving behind a legacy that still echoes today. Their stories are not just about dusty books and ancient texts. They are tales of passion, rivalry, and the sheer audacity of human thought. Number 10, Filippo Brunelleschi, the man who cracked the sky. Filippo Brunelleschi, a name that still rings with architectural might, was not merely a builder. He was a scholar of space, a master of engineering, and a revolutionary thinker. Born in Florence in 1377, Brunelleschi started his career not with bricks and mortar, but with gold and silver. He trained as a goldsmith, a highly respected profession that demanded precision, artistry, and a deep understanding of materials. This early training provided him with an eye for detail and a practical approach to complex problems that would define his later work. He crafted magnificent pieces, some destined for the altars of Florentine churches. The records from his early life suggest a curious mind, always tinkering, always observing the mechanics of the world around him. He learned to work with different metals, understanding their properties, and this knowledge was not just about making beautiful objects, it was about understanding structure and form. Brunelleschi's journey took a dramatic turn when he lost a major competition in 1401. The task was to create bronze doors for the Florence Baptistry, a coveted commission. He competed against Lorenzo Ghiberti, another immensely talented goldsmith. Both submitted breathtaking panels depicting the sacrifice of Isaac. Accounts from the time speak of Brunelleschi's panel showing a raw, dramatic intensity, while Ghiberti's displayed a more graceful, classical flow. Ghiberti won, and this defeat, though painful, pushed Brunelleschi onto a different path, one that would change the face of architecture forever. He reportedly left Florence for a time, traveling to Rome with his friend and fellow artist Donatello. There, they meticulously studied the ruins of ancient Roman buildings. They measured, sketched, and analyzed the colossal structures, trying to unlock the secrets of Roman engineering, especially how they built their massive domes and vaults. The contemporary observers described Brunelleschi poring over the Pantheon, trying to understand how such a vast, unbuttressed dome could stand for centuries. He was not just admiring the aesthetics, he was reverse engineering the past, seeking the lost knowledge of a forgotten era. Upon his return to Florence, Brunelleschi's mind was fixated on a singular, monumental problem, the dome of the Santa Maria del Fiore Cathedral. For decades, the massive octagonal opening at the cathedral's heart had remained open, a symbol of the city's incomplete ambitions. No one knew how to build a dome of such unprecedented size without traditional wooden scaffolding, which was either too expensive or impossible to construct at that scale. Other architects proposed solutions that were either impractical or structurally unsound. Brunelleschi, with his background in goldsmithing and his intense study of Roman techniques, presented a radical idea. He proposed a self-supporting dome, built without a central wooden framework, using a sophisticated system of interlocking bricks and chains. His concept was so revolutionary that many dismissed him as a madman. Historians often recount the famous egg test. When challenged to explain how he would build the dome without support, Brunelleschi reportedly asked his skeptical rivals if they could make a standing egg stand upright on a table. When they failed, he gently cracked the egg at one end, making it stand. He then declared that once he had shown them his method for the dome, they would understand it just as easily as they understood the egg trick, but not before. This defiance and confidence eventually won him the commission, though he was forced to share it, at least initially, with his old rival Ghiberti. Brunelleschi, however, gradually assumed full control as his innovative methods proved superior. The construction of the dome began in 1420 and continued for 16 years. It was an engineering marvel that combined practical ingenuity with deep theoretical understanding. Brunelleschi invented new hoisting machinery, including an ox-powered reverse gear system to lift heavy stones and bricks hundreds of feet into the air. He designed special boats to transport materials up the Arno River. He meticulously planned every layer of the dome, using a herringbone pattern for the bricks that distributed weight and prevented collapse. He also developed a double shell design with an inner dome supporting an outer one, making the structure both lighter and stronger. Records of his work habits reveal a relentless perfectionist who personally oversaw every detail, often sleeping at the construction site. Beyond the dome, Brunelleschi's intellectual contribution extended to the very principles of art and architecture. He is credited with formally developing the mathematical theory of linear perspective. This groundbreaking concept allowed artists to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface, transforming painting and sculpture. His experiments involved optical devices and precise geometric calculations, allowing artists to render buildings and figures with unprecedented realism. Contemporary artists like Masaccio quickly adopted his methods, forever changing the way art was created. Brunelleschi's work on perspective was not just an artistic tool, it was a scholarly breakthrough in understanding optics and geometry, a true blending of art and science. His treatise on perspective, though not widely disseminated in his lifetime, laid the groundwork for generations of artists and mathematicians. Brunelleschi also designed other significant buildings in Florence, including the Ospedale degli Innocenti, an orphanage that showcased revolutionary harmonious proportions and classical elements, and the Pazzi Chapel, a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture. These structures demonstrated his mastery of classical forms, his understanding of space and light, and his commitment to beauty rooted in mathematical principles. He was a pioneer in applying classical Roman ideas, not just in imitation, but in reinterpretation, bringing about a new architectural language. His relationship with the Medici family, though not always as direct as other scholars, was significant. Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch of the family, admired Brunelleschi's genius and commissioned him for projects like the rebuilding of the San Lorenzo Church, a key Medici family church. This patronage allowed Brunelleschi to push boundaries and realize his monumental visions. Brunelleschi died in 1446, a revered figure in Florence. He was buried in the cathedral. He helped complete a testament to his extraordinary achievement. His legacy was not just a dome, but a new way of thinking about the world, about structure, about vision, and about the limitless potential of human ingenuity. Number 9. Sandro Botticelli, the brush of Neoplatonism. Sandro Botticelli, born Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filippi in 1445, was more than just a painter. He was a visual scholar, interpreting the philosophical currents of his age onto canvas with unmatched grace and mystery. His canvases were not mere decorations, they were intricate tapestries woven with classical mythology, Christian allegory, and the heady ideas of Neoplatonism that buzzed through the intellectual circles of Medici Florence. Botticelli's early training took him from his family's tanning business to the goldsmith's workshop, a common starting point for many Florentine artists. This gave him a precision and understanding of line that would define his distinctive style. Later, he apprenticed under Fra Filippo Lippi, a renowned painter, where he learned the art of fresco and panel painting, mastering the delicate rendering of figures and drapery. Botticelli's career blossomed under the generous patronage of the Medici family, especially Lorenzo the Magnificent. The Medici were not just patrons of art, they were patrons of ideas, fostering an environment where philosophy, poetry, and art intertwined. Botticelli became a frequent guest and a favorite artist at the Medici court, living among scholars and poets, absorbing the intellectual ferment that characterized the era. Records from the time indicate that Botticelli was particularly close to Lorenzo's younger brother, Giuliano de' Medici, who was tragically assassinated during the Pazzi conspiracy. This personal connection deepened his ties to the family and exposed him to the cutting-edge thoughts of the Florentine Renaissance. He painted portraits of the family members, capturing their likeness with a sharp, almost melancholic beauty. his most famous works, Primavera and The Birth of Venus, are prime examples of his scholarly engagement. These paintings are not simple illustrations of myths, they are complex visual puzzles echoing the philosophical debates happening in the Platonic Academy, a group of scholars championed by the Medici. Primavera, for instance, features figures from classical mythology like Venus, Flora, Zephyrus, and the Three Graces. At first glance, it might seem like a joyful celebration of spring. However, scholars of the time would have recognized deeper meanings. The painting is believed to be an allegorical representation of Neoplatonic concepts, perhaps illustrating the progression from material love to spiritual love, or the idea of harmonious beauty. The orange trees in the background are a subtle nod to the Medici family, whose coat of arms often featured golden spheres resembling oranges. It was a painting meant to be read as much as admired, requiring an understanding of classical texts and contemporary philosophy. The Birth of Venus, another iconic masterpiece, depicts the goddess of love arriving on the shores of Cyprus, emerging from a seashell. Like Primavera, this painting is steeped in Neoplatonic thought. Venus, for the Florentine Neoplatonists, represented not just physical beauty, but divine love and spiritual beauty. Her arrival symbolizes the awakening of the soul to beauty and truth. The figures, with their ethereal quality and flowing lines, seem to inhabit a dreamlike realm, transcending mere earthly existence. The classical subject matter, combined with a profound philosophical undercurrent, made these paintings unique and deeply meaningful to the educated elite of Florence. Botticelli infused these myths with a spiritual dimension, transforming pagan stories into vehicles for Christian truth, a common theme among Neoplatonists. Botticelli's scholarly approach extended beyond his grand mythological works. He also produced numerous religious paintings, altarpieces, and Madonnas. Even in these seemingly conventional subjects, he often imbued them with a distinct emotional depth and an almost poetic sensibility that distinguished them from other artists. His Madonnas often have a pensive, melancholic gaze, suggesting an awareness of future sorrows. His Adoration of the Magi features portraits of the Medici family and other prominent Florentines, subtly integrating his patrons into the sacred narrative, blurring the lines between the divine and the worldly, a practice common in the arts sponsored by the powerful family. Towards the end of the 15th century, Florence experienced a dramatic shift in its intellectual and spiritual climate. The fiery Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola rose to prominence, denouncing the secularism, moral decay, and excessive luxury of the Medici court. But Savonarola preached hellfire and brimstone, advocating for a return to puritanical values and a rejection of worldly possessions, including art. Botticelli, deeply affected by Savonarola's powerful sermons, underwent a profound spiritual crisis. Records from the time indicate he was one of the artists who actively participated in the bonfire of the vanities, where objects deemed sinful, including secular artworks, lavish clothing, and classical texts, were publicly burned in the Piazza della Signoria. This drastic shift in Botticelli's outlook led him to abandon his mythological subjects and focus almost exclusively on religious art, often with a starker, more emotionally charged style. This period of his life demonstrates not just an artist, but a thinker grappling with profound spiritual questions, reacting to the shifting intellectual winds of his city. His later works, like The Mystical Nativity, reflect this intense piety and an apocalyptic vision, filled with symbolic imagery that needed interpretation, just like his earlier Neoplatonic pieces. The Mystical Nativity is notably different from his earlier serene works, filled with dancing angels and agitated figures, reflecting the political turmoil and religious fervor of the time. Botticelli died in 1510, his later years marked by declining health and a more reclusive life. While he did not produce formal treatises or philosophical texts like other scholars, his paintings served as eloquent visual arguments, profound interpretations of complex ideas, and a living record of the intellectual and spiritual life of the Medici era in Florence. His work remains a powerful testament to the intersection of art, philosophy, and patronage in one of history's most vibrant periods. Number 8. Cristoforo Landino, the guardian of Florentine thought. Cristoforo Landino, born in Florence in 1425, was more than just a university professor. He was a dedicated humanist, a prolific writer, and a central figure in transmitting the intellectual heritage of classical antiquity to his contemporaries. His life was devoted to scholarship, and his work profoundly shaped the intellectual landscape of Florence under the Medici. Landino's early education was steeped in classical studies, a hallmark of the burgeoning humanist movement. He excelled in Latin and Greek, mastering the languages that unlocked the wisdom of ancient Greece and Rome. This deep linguistic foundation allowed him to critically engage with texts that few others could access with such fluency. Landino's academic career flourished, and he became a highly respected lecturer at the Florentine Studio, the city's university, holding the chair of rhetoric and poetry. His lectures were not dry academic exercises, they were vibrant discussions that attracted a wide audience, including members of the Medici family and their intellectual circle. He breathed new life into the study of classical authors like Virgil, Horace, and Cicero, presenting their works not just as literary masterpieces, but as moral guides and sources of profound wisdom applicable to contemporary life. Records from his teaching career show a commitment to making classical texts accessible and relevant to his students. He believed that the study of the humanities could cultivate virtue, eloquence, and good citizenship. One of Landino's most significant contributions was his detailed and extensive commentary on Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Published in 1481, this monumental work was far more than a simple annotation. Landino's commentary placed Dante within the context of classical philosophy, Neoplatonism, and contemporary Florentine thought. He meticulously explained Dante's complex allegories, historical references, and theological nuances, making the epic poem comprehensible to a wider audience. He presented Dante not just as a poet, but as a profound philosopher and theologian whose work rivaled the greatest minds of antiquity. The commentary was lavishly illustrated with engravings by Botticelli, a testament to the close intellectual and artistic connections within the Medici sphere. The publication of this work was a major cultural event in Florence, celebrated with great pomp. It was a validation of Dante's standing as a national poet and a demonstration of Florentine intellectual prowess. Landino's Disputations Camaldulenses, or Camaldolese Disputations, is another cornerstone of his scholarly output. Written in 1474, this dialogue format treatise imagines a series of discussions held at a monastery in Camaldoli, featuring some of the era's most prominent intellectuals, including Lorenzo de' Medici and Leon Battista Alberti. The discussions cover a wide range of topics, from the active versus contemplative life to the nature of the supreme good and the dignity of humanity. It is in this work that Landino most clearly articulates the philosophical synthesis of Platonism, Aristotelianism, and Christian theology that was characteristic of Florentine Neoplatonism. He explored the idea that classical wisdom and Christian faith were not contradictory, but complementary, striving for a unified understanding of truth. This work serves as a window into the vibrant intellectual debates that took place within the Medici circle, showcasing the free exchange of ideas that Lorenzo the Magnificent fostered. With Landino's relationship with the Medici family was one of deep respect and enduring patronage. Cosimo de' Medici, the patriarch, recognized Landino's erudition early on and ensured his position at the studio. Lorenzo the Magnificent continued this patronage, relying on Landino not only as a revered scholar, but also as an advisor and a cultural ambassador. Landino served as Lorenzo's secretary, a position that brought him into the inner workings of the Medici court and exposed him to the practical realities of governance. This role allowed him to observe the political landscape firsthand, enriching his understanding of the classical texts he lectured upon. His presence at the court solidified the Medici's reputation as enlightened rulers who valued intellectual pursuits. Beyond his formal writings and teaching, Landino was instrumental in establishing the Platonic Academy, an informal gathering of scholars supported by the Medici, dedicated to the study of Plato's works. Although Marsilio Ficino is often credited with leading the academy, Landino was a vital participant and intellectual contributor, providing much of the classical context and linguistic expertise. These meetings were not strictly academic lectures, but open dialogues where ideas were freely exchanged and new interpretations of ancient philosophy were forged. Contemporary accounts describe evenings filled with spirited debate, poetry readings, and the shared excitement of discovering ancient wisdom. Landino also held several civic positions in Florence, demonstrating the humanist ideal of the scholar as an engaged citizen. He served in the Florentine chancery and held various magistracies, applying his rhetorical skills and classical knowledge to the practical affairs of the Republic. This integration of scholarship with public service was a key tenet of civic humanism, which emphasized the importance of active participation in the life of the city. He believed that true learning should lead to virtuous action and service to the community. Landino's later years saw him continue his scholarly endeavors, translating and commenting on more classical texts. He passed away in 1498, having lived through a period of immense intellectual and political change in Florence. His legacy is one of rigorous scholarship, eloquent prose, and a tireless dedication to preserving and interpreting the intellectual treasures of the past, making them alive and relevant for his own time and for generations to come. His work stands as a testament to the profound humanist spirit that defined the Florentine Renaissance under the Medici. Number 7. Francesco Guicciardini, the Cold Eye of Power. Francesco Guicciardini, born in Florence in 1483, was not merely a historian. He was a shrewd political observer, a seasoned diplomat, and a profound thinker who dissected the mechanics of power with an unsparing, realistic gaze. His works offer a cynical yet remarkably insightful view into the political realities of Renaissance Italy, a stark contrast to some of the more idealistic humanists of his time. Guicciardini came from a prominent Florentine family, deeply entrenched in the city's political and commercial life. His family had a long history of supporting the Medici, but also of navigating the complex and often treacherous waters of Republican politics. This background gave him an intimate understanding of how power truly functioned, both within and outside the formal structures of government. Guicciardini received a rigorous humanist education, studying law in Florence, Padua, and Pisa. He excelled in rhetoric, Latin, and classical literature, but his primary interests lay in practical affairs, particularly law and politics. He believed that understanding history and applying it to contemporary challenges was the highest form of intellectual pursuit. His legal training instilled in him a keen sense of logical argument and a critical approach to evidence, qualities that would define his historical writing. Records from his youth suggest a pragmatic and ambitious temperament, always seeking to understand the underlying causes of events rather than simply observing them. His career was marked by rapid ascent and direct involvement in high politics. At just 28 years old, in 1512, he was appointed ambassador of the Florentine Republic to the court of Ferdinand II of Aragon, a pivotal role during a period of intense diplomatic maneuvering in Italy. This experience exposed him to the grand chessboard of European power politics, where alliances shifted like sand and self-interest often trumped lofty ideals. He observed kings, popes, and powerful factions, learning firsthand how decisions were truly made, often through cunning, deceit, and brute force. This early exposure to realpolitik profoundly shaped his worldview. When the Medici returned to power in Florence in 1512, Guicciardini, despite his family's Republican leanings, quickly adapted. He understood the need to ally with the dominant power to secure his career and safeguard his family's interests. He entered the service of the Medici popes, Leo X and Clement VII, both former Florentine rulers. Under their patronage, he became a highly influential figure in the Papal States. He served as governor of Modena and Reggio, then of Parma, and finally as president of the Romagna. These were powerful administrative roles, granting him significant authority and exposing him to the corruption and inefficiencies of governance. He suppressed rebellions, administered justice, and managed papal finances, gaining an unparalleled insight into the practical difficulties of ruling. Guicciardini's most significant scholarly contributions are his two major historical works, Storia Fiorentine, History of Florence, and Storia d'Italia, History of Italy. story Florentine, written earlier but published posthumously, covers the period from the mid-14th century to his own time. It offers a detailed and candid account of Florentine politics, particularly the rise of the Medici family. What sets it apart is Guicciardini's critical perspective. He did not idealize Florence's Republican past or the Medici's rule. He dissected events with a sharp, often cynical eye, examining the motivations of individuals and the interplay of factions. He was deeply concerned with the particular or individual self-interest, believing it to be a primary driver of human action. His magnum opus, Storia d'Italia, completed towards the end of his life, is a monumental work covering the period from 1494 to 1534. It is considered one of the foundational texts of modern historiography. Unlike earlier chronicles that often focused on moral lessons or divine providence, Guicciardini sought to provide a factual, evidence-based account, analyzing cause and effect with a detached, almost scientific rigor. He relied on official documents, diplomatic correspondence, and first-hand accounts, presenting a panoramic view of the Italian wars and their devastating impact on the peninsula. He described the ambitions of foreign powers like France and Spain, the shifting alliances of Italian states, and the machinations of the papacy. Guicciardini's realism earned him the title of the historian of truth. He rarely romanticized events or characters. He often painted a grim picture of human nature, showing how ambition, greed, and fear drove political actors. He did not offer easy solutions or grand moral pronouncements. Instead, he presented the complexities and ambiguities of power, acknowledging that even well-intentioned actions could have disastrous consequences. His analysis was characterized by a profound skepticism towards abstract ideals and a focus on concrete facts and human motivations. He recognized the role of fortune or luck, but emphasized the importance of prudence in navigating the unpredictable currents of history. Another important work by Guicciardini is his Ricordi Maxims, or Remembrances. This collection of aphorisms and reflections provides a fascinating glimpse into his private thoughts and his philosophy of life and politics. The Ricordi are brief, often pithy observations on human nature, governance, diplomacy, and personal conduct. They reveal a man deeply aware of the imperfections of the world and the limitations of human agency. For example, he advised caution, adaptability, and a pragmatic approach to problem solving. He believed that general rules were rarely applicable without considering the specific circumstances of each situation. These maxims show a mind that distilled years of practical experience into succinct, powerful insights. Guicciardini's relationship with Niccolò Machiavelli, his contemporary, is often discussed. While both were keen observers of Florentine politics and wrote about similar themes, their approaches differed. Machiavelli, in The Prince, sought to prescribe how a ruler should act to acquire and maintain power. Guicciardini, in contrast, aimed to describe how power actually operated, often lamenting the immorality he observed. They respected each other's intellect, and their works provide complementary perspectives on the tumultuous politics of their era. Guicciardini died in 1540, having lived through the fall of the Florentine Republic and the permanent establishment of Medici rule. His writings, though sometimes bleak in their assessment of humanity, remain essential for understanding the Renaissance, offering a clear-eyed, unsentimental account of power, politics, and the relentless pursuit of individual interest in a world of shifting allegiances. Number 6. Leon Battista Alberti, the Universal Man. Leon Battista Alberti, born in Genoa in 1404 to a Florentine family exiled by the Medici, was the quintessential Renaissance man, a true polymath whose intellect spanned architecture, art, philosophy, cryptography, ethics, and even athletics. He was a scholar not just of books but of the entire human experience, striving to synthesize knowledge from diverse fields into a cohesive understanding of the world. His life was a testament to the humanist ideal of cultivating all human faculties. Alberti's early life was marked by the challenges of exile. His family, though prominent, lived away from their ancestral city due to the political machinations of the Medici. This early exposure to the outside world, particularly in Padua and Bologna, where he received a superb education, broadened his perspective. He studied law, classical literature, mathematics, and science with equal fervor. Contemporary accounts speak of his prodigious memory and his ability to master new subjects with remarkable speed. He was not just intellectually brilliant, he was also physically gifted, excelling in riding, fencing, and even reportedly throwing a coin over the top of the Florence Cathedral, though this last anecdote is likely embellished. Despite his family's exile, Alberti eventually made his way to Rome, and later, critically, to Florence. His return to Florence in the 1430s marked a turning point in his career and for the city's intellectual life. The Medici had consolidated their power, and Cosimo de' Medici, recognizing Alberti's extraordinary talents, welcomed him. Alberti was fascinated by the intellectual vibrancy of Florence and the ongoing architectural marvels, particularly Brunelleschi's dome. He became a central figure in the city's humanist circles, engaging with scholars, artists, and patrons. Alberti's most profound impact came from his theoretical treatises, which systematized and articulated the principles of Renaissance art and architecture. His three major works, written in Latin and later in vernacular Italian, became foundational texts for generations of artists and architects. De Pictura on Painting, written in 1435, was the first theoretical treatise on painting in the Renaissance. In it, Alberti laid out the principles of linear perspective, building upon Brunelleschi's practical discoveries, but providing a clear mathematical framework. He explained how to construct a unified, rational space in a painting, how to use light and shadow, and how to compose figures effectively. He stressed the importance of historia, or narrative composition, where a painting should tell a story clearly and emotionally. He elevated painting from a mere craft to an intellectual pursuit, deserving of philosophical study. This work was a revelation for artists, providing them with a theoretical basis for their craft. His next major treatise, De Re Edificatoria on the Art of Building, completed around 1452, was a monumental work on architecture, a comprehensive guide to building theory and practice. Inspired by Vitruvius's ancient Roman text, Alberti's work went far beyond it, applying humanist principles to architectural design. He argued that beauty in architecture was not arbitrary, but rooted in reason, proportion, and harmony, deriving from mathematical principles observed in nature and classical antiquity. He discussed everything from site selection and building materials to the design of temples, houses, and public squares. He emphasized the importance of functionality, durability, and beauty, arguing that architecture should serve both practical needs and elevate the human spirit. This book became the architectural Bible for the Renaissance, influencing architects for centuries. De Statua on Sculpture, though shorter, addressed similar principles for the art of sculpture. In all his treatises, Alberti championed the idea of the artist as a learned individual, a liberal artist, rather than a mere craftsman. He believed that artists should be knowledgeable in geometry, history, literature, and philosophy to create truly meaningful works. This elevation of the artist's status was a key aspect of the Renaissance. Beyond his theoretical work, Alberti also put his architectural theories into practice. Though not as prolific a builder as some, his designs were highly influential. He completed the facade of the Santa Maria Novella church in Florence, harmonizing classical elements with the existing Gothic structure. He also designed the Palazzo Rucellai, a landmark of Renaissance civic architecture, showcasing the orderly progression of classical orders on its facade. His most ambitious project was the Church of Sant'Andrea in Mantua, which featured a monumental triumphal arch facade, a powerful expression of classical grandeur. These projects demonstrated his deep understanding of classical forms and his innovative application of them. Alberti's relationship with the Medici was complex. As an exile, he spent his early life outside Florence, but Cosimo de' Medici facilitated his return and recognized his genius. Alberti dedicated de Pictura to Brunelleschi, and later enjoyed the patronage of various powerful figures, including Popes Nicholas V and Pius II, as well as the Russelli family in Florence. His connection to the Medici was through the intellectual climate they fostered, rather than exclusive direct patronage. He was a respected peer, an occasional collaborator with the Medici's inner circle of scholars and artists. He was a central figure in the discussions within the Platonic Academy, contributing his insights on aesthetics and the nature of beauty. Alberti also engaged in practical applications of his knowledge. He invented methods for surveying land, designed machines, and even experimented with optics. His Momus, a satirical novel, revealed his critical and often cynical view of human affairs, showing a mind that was not just idealistic, but also acutely aware of human folly. His Della Famiglia, On the Family, explored ethics, economics, and the structure of the household, offering advice on moral conduct and responsible living. This work, written in the vernacular, aimed to instruct Florentine citizens on how to live a virtuous and successful life. Alberti died in 1472, leaving behind a legacy as a visionary who brought together art, science, and philosophy. He exemplified the Renaissance ideal of human perfectibility, demonstrating that intellectual excellence could be achieved across an astonishing array of disciplines, and that theory and practice could profoundly inform each other. Number 5. Niccolò Machiavelli, the master of political realism. Niccolò Machiavelli, born in Florence in 1469, was not a scholar in the traditional sense of academic study, but a profound political theorist, a diplomat, and a historian whose observations on power continue to shock and provoke debate centuries later. His writings, particularly The Prince, tore down idealistic notions of governance and presented a chillingly pragmatic view of how rulers acquire and maintain power. His life was inextricably linked to the turbulent political fortunes of Florence, especially the rise and fall of the Medici. Machiavelli grew up in a respectable but not wealthy family, at a time when Florence was still nominally a republic, though heavily influenced by the Medici. His education was a classical humanist one, focusing on Latin, history, and rhetoric. He read deeply in ancient authors like Livy and Cicero, soaking in their lessons about republics and empires. This classical background provided the foundation for his later political analysis, allowing him to draw parallels between ancient Rome and contemporary Italy. The records from his early life suggest a sharp mind, observant and analytical, with a keen interest in human behavior and the dynamics of authority. Machiavelli's public career began in 1498, shortly after the expulsion of the Medici from Florence and the execution of Girolamo Savonarola. He secured a prominent position as second chancellor of the Florentine Republic and secretary to the Ten of Liberty and Peace, a committee responsible for foreign policy and defense. This was no ivory tower appointment. Machiavelli was directly involved in the practical day-to-day operations of the Florentine state. He embarked on numerous diplomatic missions throughout Italy and to major European courts, including those of King Louis XII of France, Emperor Maximilian I, and Cesare Borgia. These diplomatic experiences were crucial to the formation of his political thought. He observed firsthand the ruthlessness of rulers, the fragility of alliances, and the constant struggle for power. He saw how decisions were made not out of moral rectitude, but out of necessity, self-interest, and a desire for security. His encounters with Cesare Borgia, the ambitious and often brutal son of Pope Alexander VI, were particularly impactful. Machiavelli admired Borgia's decisiveness and willingness to employ any means necessary to achieve his objectives, seeing in him a model for effective, if morally ambiguous, leadership. These real-world observations became the raw material for his later theories. The political landscape of Florence shifted dramatically in 1512 when the Medici, with the support of Spanish forces, returned to power, overthrowing the Republic. Machiavelli, as a prominent official of the Republican government, was immediately dismissed from his post. He was even suspected of conspiracy against the Medici, imprisoned, tortured, and then eventually released. This period of political disgrace and forced retirement from public life was devastating for Machiavelli, but it also became the crucible in which his most famous works were forged. Exiled to his small estate outside Florence, Machiavelli poured his energies into writing. It was during these years that he penned The Prince, his most controversial and enduring work, around 1513. Dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici the Younger, The Prince was conceived as a manual for rulers, offering advice on how to acquire and maintain power. It famously argued that a ruler must be willing to act immorally when necessary, to be both a lion strong and fierce, and a fox cunning and deceptive. He separated politics from morality, suggesting that the effectiveness of a ruler should be judged not by their virtue but by their ability to achieve and maintain the state's stability and power. This radical departure from traditional political philosophy, which emphasized the moral goodness of rulers, shocked his contemporaries and continues to spark debate. Machiavelli's argument that the end justifies the means was a pragmatic, almost clinical assessment of political reality. He observed that rulers who tried to be strictly moral often failed, while those who were ruthless but effective succeeded. Simultaneously, Machiavelli worked on Discourses on Livy, a much larger and more complex work that explored the principles of republican government. While The Prince focused on the singular ruler, the Discourses celebrated the virtues of a republic, drawing lessons from ancient Rome. He argued that a strong republic required civic virtue, active participation from its citizens, and a system of checks and balances. He believed that conflict between different social classes, when properly channeled, could actually strengthen a republic. This work revealed Machiavelli's deep commitment to republican ideals, contrasting with the immediate practicality of The Prince, which was written for a specific, urgent political context. Machiavelli also wrote The Art of War, a treatise on military organization and strategy, advocating for a citizen militia rather than reliance on mercenary armies, a concept he had tried to implement during his time in government. His History of Florence, commissioned by the Medici, provided a detailed account of the city's past, once again revealing his critical and analytical approach to historical events, focusing on political factions and their struggles. Despite dedicating The Prince to Lorenzo de' Medici, Machiavelli never fully regained a prominent political position under the Medici. He occasionally received minor commissions, like writing the history of Florence, but he remained largely on the sidelines, observing the political drama unfold. He watched the Medici's grip on Florence tighten, and the republic he served crumble. His pragmatic advice, while perhaps appreciated, did not secure him the role he desired. Machiavelli died in 1527, shortly after the sack of Rome and the temporary expulsion of the Medici from Florence. He never saw his republican dreams fully realized. His works, particularly The Prince, were initially controversial and later banned by the church. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, his ideas permeated political thought throughout Europe. He forced people to confront the harsh realities of power, to see politics not as an idealized moral endeavor, but as a struggle for survival and control. His unflinching realism remains a cornerstone of political science, making him one of the most influential and debated scholars of the Medici era. Number 4. Leonardo da Vinci, the Unquenchable Seeker. Leonardo da Vinci, born in 1452 in the Tuscan village of Vinci, was a figure of unparalleled curiosity and boundless intellectual energy, whose life was a relentless pursuit of understanding the universe in all its forms. Though celebrated today primarily as an artist, Leonardo was a scholar of nature, a pioneer of scientific inquiry, an inventor, and an anatomist, whose notebooks reveal a mind constantly questioning, observing, and experimenting. His connection to Florence and the Medici family was fundamental to his early development and much of his artistic patronage. Leonardo's formal education was rudimentary, but his informal learning was extraordinary. He received an apprenticeship in Florence at the age of 14, entering the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the leading artists of the day. This was not just an art studio. It was a hub of creative and technical innovation, where painting, sculpture, and goldsmithing were taught. Leonardo learned practical skills in drawing, painting, modeling, and even mechanics. Records from the workshop speak of his exceptional talent and his insatiable desire to understand the underlying principles of everything he observed. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, questioning why light fell a certain way, how muscles moved, and the mechanics of flight. During his years in Florence, Leonardo was exposed to the vibrant intellectual atmosphere fostered by the Medici. While he was not part of the inner circle of humanist scholars in the same way as Ficino or Poliziano, he certainly benefited from the patronage of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo, always keen to surround himself with talent, recognized Leonardo's burgeoning genius. Leonardo received early commissions from the Medici, including a portrait of Ginevra de' Benci and the unfinished Adoration of the Magi for the monastery of San Donato, a Scopetto, though the Medici's vast commissions often favored artists who fit their aesthetic more directly. The Medici court provided a rich environment for artistic and intellectual exchange, where Leonardo could interact with other artists, engineers, and thinkers. Leonardo's true scholarly work is best understood through his vast collection of notebooks, which contain tens of thousands of pages of observations, sketches, and writings. These notebooks are a testament to his multidisciplinary approach to knowledge. He meticulously documented his investigations into anatomy, geology, botany, optics, fluid dynamics, and mechanics. He wrote in mirror script, from right to left, a personal quirk that has intrigued scholars for centuries. These notebooks were his private laboratories, filled with hypotheses, experiments, and conclusions. His anatomical studies were particularly groundbreaking. Through numerous dissections of human cadavers, a controversial and often dangerous practice at the time, Leonardo produced hundreds of detailed drawings of bones, muscles, tendons, organs, and the circulatory system. His illustrations were incredibly accurate and went far beyond the anatomical knowledge of his contemporaries. He was not just mapping the body, he was trying to understand its mechanics, how each part moved and functioned together. He sketched the human heart as a complex pump, theorized about blood circulation, and detailed the intricacies of the eye and brain. His work here predated many of the discoveries of later anatomists. Leonardo also conducted extensive studies of nature. He observed the flight of birds and designed flying machines, decades before human flight became a reality. He studied the flow of water and designed hydraulic systems for canals and fountains. He examined rock formations and correctly theorized about the age of the Earth and the formation of fossils. His botanical studies led him to create detailed drawings of plants, understanding their growth patterns and structures. He approached these subjects with the rigor of a scientist, systematically observing, hypothesizing, and testing his ideas. His notebooks are filled with designs for everything from military weapons and fortifications to musical instruments and complex machinery, demonstrating his inventive genius. His artistic innovations were often rooted in his scientific observations. His mastery of sfumato, the soft, hazy transitions between colors and tones that create a sense of depth and mystery, was based on his understanding of optics and light. His ability to render the human form with such lifelike accuracy was a direct result of his anatomical studies. For Leonardo, art and science were not separate disciplines, but interconnected ways of understanding the world. Painting was a means of scientific inquiry, allowing him to visualize and communicate his observations. Leonardo's relationship with the Medici was not always smooth. He left Florence in 1482 for Milan, seeking patronage from Ludovico Sforza, perhaps feeling that Florence, despite its intellectual vibrancy, did not fully appreciate his broader scientific and engineering ambitions. In Milan, he worked on ambitious projects like the Last Supper and monumental equestrian statues, while continuing his scientific investigations. He returned to Florence periodically, including for the painting of the Mona Lisa, during periods of political upheaval. His later years were spent in France, under the patronage of King Francis I, where he continued to invent and explore. Leonardo was not a public scholar in the way that professors lectured or humanists debated. His scholarship was intensely personal, driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge and understanding. He rarely published his findings, and his notebooks remained largely private during his lifetime. This meant that many of his scientific discoveries were lost to immediate posterity. However, his method, the relentless observation, the detailed drawing, the systematic questioning, laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would follow. He truly embodied the spirit of inquiry that the Renaissance, fostered by patrons like the Medici, made possible. Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519, leaving behind not just masterpieces of art, but a profound legacy as one of history's most brilliant and versatile minds, a true scholar of everything. Number 3. Angelo Poliziano, the poet, laureate of the Medici court. Angelo Poliziano, born Angelo Ambrogini in 1454, was more than just a poet. He was a brilliant humanist, a master of classical languages, and the intellectual heartbeat of Lorenzo de' Medici's court. He was the epitome of the Renaissance scholar-poet, seamlessly blending profound erudition with exquisite literary artistry. His close relationship with the Medici family positioned him at the very center of Florentine intellectual life, where he shaped the minds of the next generation of rulers and celebrated the golden age of Medici patronage. Poliziano's brilliance was evident from a young age. He arrived in Florence as an orphan, but his exceptional intellect quickly caught the attention of Lorenzo de' Medici. At the age of 10, he began studying Latin and Greek under the guidance of some of the era's most distinguished scholars, including Marsilio Ficino and Cristoforo Landino. He mastered both classical languages with astonishing speed and fluency, an achievement that would define his entire career. The records from his youth describe him as a voracious reader, devouring ancient texts and showing a precocious understanding of their nuances. By his mid-teens, Poliziano was already translating classical Greek texts into Latin, impressing his tutors and patrons alike. His translation of passages from Homer's Iliad into elegant Latin verse earned him the admiration of Lorenzo de' Medici. Lorenzo recognized his extraordinary talent and brought him into his household, making him tutor to his children, including the future Pope Leo X. This was not merely a teaching position. It was an invitation into the inner sanctum of the most powerful family in Florence, a place where art, philosophy, and politics converged. As a tutor, Poliziano was instrumental in shaping the humanist education of the young Medici. He instilled in them a love for classical literature, rhetoric, and philosophy, guiding them through the works of Plato, Aristotle, and the great Roman authors. He believed that a strong classical foundation was essential for enlightened leadership. He created a curriculum that was both rigorous and inspiring, demonstrating his profound pedagogical skills. His personal closeness to the Medici children also meant he influenced them not just academically but culturally, fostering their appreciation for beauty and intellectual pursuits. Poliziano's scholarly output was diverse and highly influential. He was renowned for his skill as a philologist, a scholar of language and texts. He pioneered new methods of textual criticism, meticulously comparing different manuscripts of classical works to establish the most accurate versions. His Miscellanea, published in 1489, was a collection of essays on various topics, showcasing his erudition in philology, history, and classical literature. In this work, he demonstrated his ability to correct errors in ancient texts, clarify obscure passages, and shed new light on historical events through careful linguistic analysis. His work set new standards for scholarship and greatly contributed to the accuracy and understanding of classical antiquity. Beyond his rigorous philological work, Poliziano was also a poet of exceptional talent. He wrote in both Latin and Italian, demonstrating a mastery of both classical and vernacular forms. His Latin poetry was celebrated for its elegance, purity, and adherence to classical models. His Italian poetry, however, captured the spirit of the Florentine Renaissance with remarkable charm and vibrancy. His most famous Italian work is Stanze per la Giostra, Stanzas for the Just, an unfinished poem written to celebrate a Just won by Giuliano de' Medici, Lorenzo's younger brother. This poem is a rich tapestry of classical mythology, vivid descriptions, and romantic themes, filled with allusions to ancient literature and contemporary Florentine life. It reflects the courtly culture of the Medici, where chivalry, beauty, and intellectual pursuits were intertwined. Poliziano's connection to the Medici was not just professional, it was deeply personal. He lived in the Medici Palace, participated in their intellectual gatherings, and was a close confidant of Lorenzo. He was present during the terrifying Pazzi conspiracy in 1478, when assailants attacked Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici in the Florence Cathedral. Poliziano helped Lorenzo escape the immediate danger, escorting him to safety. This event cemented his loyalty and deepened his bond with the family. His proximity to power allowed him to witness the machinations of Florentine politics firsthand, giving his poetry and prose a grounded, if sometimes idealized, perspective. Poliziano also held a prestigious professorship at the Florentine studio, the city's university. He lectured on Latin and Greek authors, drawing large and enthusiastic audiences. His lectures were known for their clarity, eloquence, and profound insights. He introduced his students to the latest scholarly discoveries and textual interpretations, cementing Florence's reputation as a leading center of humanist learning. His influence extended beyond Florence, attracting scholars from across Europe who sought to learn from his unparalleled mastery of classical languages. Towards the end of his life, Poliziano became embroiled in the intellectual and political turmoil of Florence, particularly following the death of Lorenzo the Magnificent in 1492 and the rise of Girolamo Savonarola. Like many humanists, he struggled to reconcile the secular humanism of the Medici court with Savonarola's fervent calls for moral reform. He died in 1494, just as the Medici were being expelled from Florence, marking the end of an era for humanist scholarship in the city. Poliziano's legacy is immense. He not only produced beautiful and insightful literary works, but also set new standards for textual scholarship. He exemplified the humanist ideal of the scholar as a public intellectual, contributing to both the learned world and the cultural life of his city. His presence at the Medici court solidified Florence's image as a vibrant center of intellectual and artistic innovation, a true golden age of scholarship and poetry. Number 2, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the maverick of universal knowledge. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, born in 1463 in a small principality near Ferrara, was a dazzling intellect, a philosophical prodigy, and a restless seeker of universal truth. His life was a whirlwind of intense study, daring intellectual challenges, and controversial philosophical positions that placed him at the heart of the Florentine Renaissance's most ambitious intellectual project. His short but impactful life was a testament to the era's boundless curiosity and its clashes with established authority. Pico came from a noble family, and from a young age, he displayed an extraordinary aptitude for learning. He studied law at Bologna, canon law at Ferrara, and philosophy at Padua and Paris. But his education went far beyond the conventional curriculum. He mastered Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic, languages that opened up vast new intellectual horizons. This linguistic prowess allowed him to delve into texts that were largely inaccessible to his contemporaries, including the Kabbalah, a mystical tradition of Jewish thought, and Hermetic writings, a collection of Hellenistic Egyptian texts on magic, astrology, and alchemy. The records from his early studies indicate an insatiable hunger for knowledge from all traditions, driven by a belief that all wisdom, regardless of its origin, ultimately pointed to a single underlying truth. In 1484, at the age of 21, Pico arrived in Florence, drawn by its vibrant intellectual scene and the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici. He quickly became a central figure in the Platonic Academy, an informal gathering of scholars supported by the Medici, led by Marsilio Ficino. Pico's brilliance and his encyclopedic knowledge astonished everyone. He was not just a scholar, he was a charismatic personality, engaging in spirited debates and charming his fellow intellectuals. He seemed to embody the limitless potential of the human mind, a core tenet of Florentine humanism. His most famous intellectual endeavor was his plan to hold a public debate in Rome in 1486, inviting scholars from across Europe to discuss 900 theses he had prepared. These theses covered an astonishing range of topics, from philosophy and theology to magic, Kabbalah, and ethics, demonstrating his ambition to synthesize all knowledge into a coherent system. To introduce this grand debate, Pico wrote his Oration on the Dignity of Man. This powerful text, often called the Manifesto of the Renaissance, argued that humanity possessed a unique and unparalleled dignity, stemming from its capacity for self-determination and its ability to ascend the chain of being. He claimed that God had given humans the freedom to choose their own nature, to rise to the level of angels or descend to the level of beasts. This radical affirmation of human freedom and potential resonated deeply with the humanist spirit of the age. However, Pico's ambition quickly led to controversy. While the oration celebrated human dignity, some of his 900 theses were deemed heretical by the Church. 7 of them were explicitly condemned by a papal commission, particularly those touching on magic and Kabbalah, which the Church viewed with suspicion. Faced with condemnation, Pico was forced to flee to France, where he was briefly imprisoned. Lorenzo de' Medici, who admired Pico's intellect and recognized his unique contribution to Florentine humanism, intervened on his behalf. Lorenzo's diplomatic efforts secured Pico's release and eventually helped him gain absolution from Pope Alexander VI in 1493, allowing him to return to Florence. Pico's close relationship with Lorenzo de' Medici was crucial. Lorenzo provided him with protection, intellectual companionship, and the resources to pursue his ambitious scholarly projects. Pico, in turn, brought immense prestige and intellectual vibrancy to the Medici court. Their conversations and intellectual exchanges were legendary, shaping the very core of Florentine Neoplatonism. Pico's synthesis of diverse traditions, Plato, Aristotle, scholasticism, Jewish mysticism, and Islamic thought, was a hallmark of the intellectual openness fostered by the Medici. He believed that truth could be found in all philosophical systems, and he sought to reconcile apparent contradictions. Despite his eventual absolution, Pico remained a devout Christian, and towards the end of his life, he became increasingly influenced by the fiery sermons of Girolamo Savonarola. He reportedly burned some of his own poetry and secular writings, embracing a more ascetic and pious life. This shift reflected the changing intellectual and spiritual climate of Florence following Lorenzo's death and the rise of Savonarola's influence. It showed a mind that was not just intellectually curious, but also deeply committed to spiritual truth. Pico died in 1494, at the young age of 31, shortly after the expulsion of the Medici from Florence and the establishment of Savonarola's theocratic republic. His death was a significant loss to the intellectual world. Although his life was cut short, his impact was profound. His oration on the dignity of man remains a cornerstone of Renaissance philosophy, powerfully articulating the era's optimistic view of human potential. His ambitious project of synthesizing all knowledge, even if ultimately incomplete, inspired generations of thinkers to look beyond conventional boundaries and seek truth in unexpected places. Pico della Mirandola stands as a symbol of the intellectual audacity and unbounded curiosity that defined the Florentine Renaissance under the Medici. Number 1. Marsilio Ficino, the Grand Master of Neoplatonism. Marsilio Ficino, born in Figline Valdarno, near Florence, in 1433, was not just a scholar, he was the spiritual guide, the philosophical architect, and the intellectual heart of the Florentine Renaissance, especially under the patronage of the Medici. He dedicated his life to reviving Plato's philosophy, translating ancient texts, and synthesizing classical wisdom with Christian theology, creating a unique philosophical system known as Florentine Neoplatonism. His relationship with the Medici family, particularly Cosimo and Lorenzo, was arguably the most significant intellectual patronage of the entire era. Ficino's journey into scholarship began at a young age. His father was Cosimo de' Medici's physician, which gave him an early connection to the powerful family. Cosimo, a man of immense wealth and intellectual curiosity, recognized Ficino's exceptional intelligence and scholarly aptitude. Cosimo specifically directed Ficino's education, steering him towards the study of Greek and, crucially, to the works of Plato. This was a deliberate and strategic move by Cosimo, who believed that Plato's philosophy held profound insights that could enrich Christian thought and provide a philosophical foundation for the humanistic ideals emerging in Florence. Records show that Cosimo provided Ficino with the necessary financial support and access to rare manuscripts, allowing him to devote himself entirely to scholarship. Ficino's magnum opus was the translation of Plato's complete works from Greek into Latin. This was a monumental undertaking, as many of Plato's dialogues had been lost or were only known through imperfect translations. Ficino's accurate and elegant translations made Plato accessible to the Western world for the first time in over 1,000 years. He not only translated, but also provided extensive commentaries interpreting Plato's ideas through a Christian lens. He believed that Platonic philosophy, with its emphasis on spiritual love, the immortality of the soul, and the pursuit of ideal forms, was highly compatible with Christian doctrine. This intellectual bridge between classical paganism and Christian faith was a hallmark of Florentine Neoplatonism. In 1462, Cosimo de' Medici gifted Ficino a villa in Careggi, just outside Florence, a place that became the informal meeting ground for the Platonic Academy. This was not a formal institution with degrees and rigid curricula, but rather a gathering of brilliant minds, poets, artists, philosophers, and statesmen who met to discuss Plato, hold symposia, intellectual banquets, and engage in spirited philosophical debates. Ficino served as the undisputed head and spiritual leader of this academy, guiding discussions and fostering an atmosphere of intellectual camaraderie. Among its members were some of the most luminous figures of the Renaissance, including Lorenzo de' Medici, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, Angelo Poliziano, and Cristoforo Landino. Ficino's own philosophical writings were deeply influential. His Theologia Platonica de Immortalitate Animarum, Platonic Theology on the Immortality of Souls, completed in 1474, was a sprawling and comprehensive treatise arguing for the soul's immortality based on Platonic principles. He argued that the human soul, being divine in nature, yearns for union with God, and that this desire testifies to its eternal existence. This work synthesized Platonic, Neoplatonic, and Christian ideas into a powerful defense of human dignity and spiritual aspiration. Another key concept developed by Ficino was Platonic love. In his commentary on Plato's Symposium, Ficino articulated the idea that love, in its purest form, is not merely physical desire but a spiritual assent, a longing for divine beauty and truth. This concept permeated the art and literature of the Florentine Renaissance, influencing artists like Botticelli and poets like Poliziano, who explored themes of idealized beauty and spiritual longing in their works. Platonic love, as defined by Ficino, became a cornerstone of Renaissance humanism, elevating human relationships to a higher, more spiritual plane. Ficino served not just as a scholar, but as a close confidant and spiritual advisor to both Cosimo and Lorenzo de' Medici. Cosimo considered him a second father figure, and Lorenzo, in turn, revered him. Lorenzo often attended the meetings at Careggi, engaging in philosophical discussions and seeking Ficino's guidance on intellectual and spiritual matters. Their relationship was one of mutual respect, with the Medici providing the patronage and protection that allowed Ficino to pursue his ambitious intellectual projects, and Ficino, in turn, providing the philosophical framework that underpinned the Medici's cultural and intellectual leadership. Ficino's presence solidified the Medici's reputation as enlightened rulers who fostered the highest forms of human thought. In his later years, Ficino became an ordained priest, further solidifying his commitment to integrating philosophy with Christian theology. He continued to write extensively, producing commentaries on other classical authors, translating mystical texts, and engaging in theological debates. His letters, collected and widely circulated, provide a rich insight into the intellectual and social life of Florence, revealing his wide network of correspondence across Europe. Ficino died in 1499, having lived through an extraordinary period of intellectual ferment and political change. His legacy was profound. He not only resurrected Plato for the Western world, but also created a unique philosophical system that influenced generations of thinkers, artists, and theologians. His ideas shaped the very intellectual and spiritual atmosphere of the Florentine Renaissance, imbuing it with a deep sense of human dignity, spiritual aspiration, and a harmonious blending of classical wisdom and Christian faith. Marsilio Ficino stands as the preeminent scholar of the Medici era, his mind a vibrant crucible, where ancient thought was reborn for a new age.